Consider the profound possibility that history's most perilous veracities were once meticulously inscribed on parchment, only to be silently expunged. Imagine if the Knights Templar, in their ultimate moments of desperation, did not merely conceal precious metals or sacred artifacts, but rather potent words, utterances so explosive, so subversive, that their own brethren violently removed them from official records. What if a fragment of such a page has now re-emerged, not complete nor perfectly preserved, yet sufficient to instill deep apprehension in any individual comprehending its significance? One might pause, allowing the investigative light to stabilize, for this inquiry seeks not material wealth or legendary tales, but rather the very truths they endeavored to obliterate. The prevailing narrative of the Knights Templar, those monastic crusaders of medieval Europe, mystics clad in armor, sworn protectors of the Holy Land, and its esoteric knowledge is widely recognized. They were ultimately condemned as heretics, their order dismantled by papal edict, their assets confiscated, their leaders subjected to torture, and their name relegated to ignominy. Yet, amidst that prolonged decline into obscurity and silence, a crucial element vanished. Not an artifact of ceremony, nor a weapon of war, but profound intellectual content. Centuries later, a scroll fragment, uncatalogued and charred at its edges, came to light. Its ink was faded, its language enigmatic, neither entirely Latin, nor Coptic, nor entirely benign. It alluded to pages that had been torn, a ledger rendered incomplete, and the unsettling implication that the ultimate truth of the Templars was not suppressed by monarchs or pontiffs, but rather meticulously redacted by the order itself. This evening, our journey traverses fire and parchment as we meticulously trace the evidence, the subtle hints, the significant absences, and the whispers encased in wax. There is even a historian who asserts that the vanished examen scroll contained a novitiate rite involving sacred geometry and lunar cycles, an argument supported solely by a marginal sketch found in a related document from Acre, depicting a peculiar spiral diagram, potentially a moon spiral or a labyrinth. The investigation commences with a particular type of parchment, not the kind carefully preserved in ornate libraries, rolled with silk ribbons and sealed with wax. This document bore the indelible marks of ash and water damage, having been subsequently rewarped and concealed for centuries within the concealed compartment of a reliquary. Intriguingly, this reliquary should not have existed within a chapel that is no longer identified on any contemporary geographical survey. The discovery occurred in 1897, when a modest team of restoration specialists in northern France carefully dislodged a decaying oak altar stone. Beneath this stone, wrapped within a bundle of deteriorated linen, lay fragments of scrolls bearing the unmistakable cross of the Knights Templar. This loss could of course be rationalized by fire, flood, or even rodent damage, the usual culprits. Yet, none of the missing scrolls are explicitly marked as damaged or lost. They are simply absent, without comment, annotation, or a scribbled footnote in the margins. Such an omission is peculiar for a clerical culture meticulously obsessed with explaining every discrepancy in exhaustive Latin detail. One particular scroll, subsequently catalogued by the Société des Manuscrits Perdus, displayed what seemed to be the commencement of an oath, perhaps a ceremonial vow. It began mid-thought and concluded mid-line. Surrounding this void were faint impressions, suggesting that something profoundly volatile had once resided there and was intentionally prevented from remaining. The investigation commences with a particular type of parchment, not the kind carefully preserved in ornate libraries, rolled with silk ribbons and sealed with wax. This document bore the indelible marks of ash and water damage, having been subsequently rewarped and concealed for centuries within the concealed compartment of a reliquary. Intriguingly, this reliquary should not have existed within a chapel that is no longer identified on any contemporary geographical survey. Investigators who examined these fragments noted another subtle, yet unforgettable detail. Char patterns surrounding the absent page sections indicated uneven burning and external scorching from centuries of smoke. However, they also revealed what appeared to be a separate incident, confined specifically to the scrolls themselves, a controlled, localized, almost surgical immolation. At some point, an attempt had been made to eradicate more than mere words, not an artifact of ceremony, nor a weapon of war, but profound intellectual content. Centuries later, a scroll fragment, uncatalogued and charred at its edges, came to light. Its ink was faded, its language enigmatic, neither entirely Latin, nor Coptic, nor entirely benign. The scrolls discovered beneath the altar appear to have survived this fire, or more accurately, to have been rescued from it. Yet they were already incomplete at that time. A ledger number, inscribed in Roman numerals, identified one scroll as Folio X66, with the next recovered scroll being Folio XL, indicating two missing. One might attribute this loss to decay, time, or even rodents. However, a private record belonging to one monk, a diary that fortuitously escaped incineration, alluded to something far more sinister: the distinct odor of oil, not wax, and the resonant sound of metal chains being dragged across stone during the night the fire commenced. He documented witnessing 3 hooded figures fleeing down the east corridor before the flames engulfed the chapter library. His final entry, penned in trembling Latin, states, "Not all fires serve for warmth." However, the precision of the slicing marks and the abrupt loss of context suggest that these pages were removed while the archive remained functional. This implies a premeditated and internal act of redaction. However, the dating of this reference, late 1297, coincides precisely with the period just months following the Reims fire. This convergence has ignited considerable debate among Templar scholars. Some argue it represents mere coincidence, contending that these parchment fragments are ritualistic rather than evidentiary. However, the dating of this reference, late 1297, coincides precisely with the period just months following the Reims fire. This convergence has ignited considerable debate among Templar scholars. Some argue it represents mere coincidence, contending that these parchment fragments are ritualistic rather than evidentiary. Furthermore, there is the intriguing aspect of the handwriting. One scroll, fragmentary and soot-fringed, with its text gradually fading into obscurity, bears a notation in an entirely different script, a hurried correction, an annotation, or perhaps even a warning. The words "non legiter hoc periculo est" translate roughly to "let this not be read, it is dangerous." Some interpret this as the scribal equivalent of a medieval reminder, a dramatic flourish, or simply a precaution. Yet, this very phrase reappears in a much later, entirely distinct manuscript from Avignon, discovered within a Dominican monastery. There, it is scrawled at the top of a reference to the Treatise of the East Wind, a lost Templar document believed to contain eschatological visions. If authentic, this would imply that what was removed was not merely controversial, but potentially prophetic. Naturally, no comprehensive discussion of these fragments would be complete without acknowledging a long-whispered theory, rarely committed to print, that one of the missing pages contained a diagram, a map not of geographical locations, but of initiation, a ritual chart that could be followed even in the absence of a master. This concept, while largely rejected by formal historians, maintains a peculiar persistence among those who investigate the mystical orders that emerged in the aftermath of the Templars' collapse. A scroll capable of imparting the highest rites, without the necessity of a mentor, would indeed represent knowledge worth obliterating. Thus, one invariably returns to the precise slicing, the localized burning, the deliberate eradication. One envisions an individual, or perhaps several, within a scriptorium illuminated by candlelight, blades glinting beside ink pots, making decisions not about what to commit to writing, but about what must perpetually remain unread. One ponders whether their hands trembled, whether their quills paused before the initial incision, One questions what truth could compel a scribe to become a censor, a monk to become a redactor. And more profoundly, one wonders if, somewhere, an exact copy was meticulously preserved. One observes those ancient ledgers, meticulously compiled by monks with infinite patience, featuring careful columns, Roman numerals, and rows upon rows of recorded names and objects. These served as the medieval world's equivalent of spreadsheets, albeit without the modern complexities of software crashes and corporate jargon. However, unlike contemporary databases, these inventories frequently concealed secrets within their very silences. One questions what truth could compel a scribe to become a censor, a monk to become a redactor. And more profoundly, one wonders if, somewhere, an exact copy was meticulously preserved. The inventory, at first glance, appears complete. It enumerates 74 scrolls, 12 bound volumes, and 7 sealed scroll tubes, each accompanied by corresponding dates and scribe initials. However, cross-referencing this with an earlier inventory from the same commandery, dated 1302, reveals an immediate and striking discrepancy. The earlier document lists 83 scrolls, indicating that 9 are now missing. One particular Templar inventory, preserved in the Vatican's Archivio Segreto and dated to the winter of 1306, seems to resonate with a pronounced silence. This document, titled Registrum Templi Grandis, represented a final summation of Templar scrolls, codices, and ritual texts housed at the Paris commandery, just prior to the commencement of the arrests. More curiously, several scrolls listed in the 1302 inventory bear duplicate titles with subtle variations. Doritus Orientis appears twice, once with an asterisk beside it. Examinatio Novicorum is listed in 2 forms, one labeled Stratus. These duplicates vanish from the 1306 version, leaving only the more orthodox-sounding titles. Consequently, what was lost may not have been physical artifacts at all. Rather, the loss might have been editorial in nature. This discrepancy has fueled years of scholarly dispute among Templar researchers. One faction posits that the duplicates were temporary copies discarded due to redundancy. Another believes that the duplicate titles signaled alternate versions of official doctrine, perhaps adapted from Eastern traditions encountered during the Crusades. There is even a historian who asserts that the vanished examen scroll contained a novitiate rite involving sacred geometry and lunar cycles, an argument supported solely by a marginal sketch found in a related document from Acre depicting a peculiar spiral diagram, potentially a moon spiral or a labyrinth. The discovery occurred in 1897 when a modest team of restoration specialists in northern France carefully dislodged a decaying oak altar stone. Beneath this stone, wrapped within a bundle of deteriorated linen, lay fragments of scrolls bearing the unmistakable cross of the Knights Templar. Another missing title is Tabula Alba, or the White Table. Modern interpretations instinctively conjure Arthurian imagery. Yet it is pertinent to recall that the Templars did, in fact, sponsor round-table reenactments in Outremer, some of which were performed not as mere spectacle, but as symbolic reflections of divine chivalry. The discovery occurred in 1897, when a modest team of restoration specialists in northern France carefully dislodged a decaying oak altar stone. Beneath this stone, wrapped within a bundle of deteriorated linen, lay fragments of scrolls bearing the unmistakable cross of the Knights Templar. However, the dating of this reference, late 1297, coincides precisely with the period just months following the Reims fire. This convergence has ignited considerable debate among Templar scholars. Some argue it represents mere coincidence, contending that these parchment fragments are ritualistic rather than evidentiary. Indeed, labyrinths possess a long and enigmatic association with Templar legend. Furthermore, one of the scrolls absent in the 1306 inventory is simply titled Via Noctis, or the Way of the Night. No known copy of this scroll exists today. although the title appears in a 17th century Jesuit polemic against heretical texts, which accuses the Templars of maintaining a pagan path disguised within Christian rites, a considerable divergence from discussions of gold chalices and bearded oaths. Something unequivocally changed. This was not an act of destructive incineration, but rather a deliberate rearrangement of foundational blueprints. This process has been subtly termed the Great Papering by certain scholars, an unofficial designation referring to what they believe was a systematic internal purge of esoteric materials. This purge was perhaps not primarily intended to conceal heresy from the Church, but rather to distance the order from teachings or rituals deemed too susceptible to misinterpretation, or perhaps too sacred to endure the impending trials. One scholar, in an unpublished letter to a colleague, characterized it as the redaction of apocalypse. The temptation, of course, is to envision dramatic bonfires, frantic shreddings, and trembling hands discarding truths into darkness. Yet, the actual narrative may have been more subtle, a slow erasure, a deliberate selection of what future Templars would remember and what they would be forbidden even to conceive, akin to choosing which dreams are safe enough to persist in daylight. And if this premise holds true, then the inventory is not merely a record of loss. It is a blueprint of intention, a map delineating what the Order sought to preserve and what it feared would be weaponized against it. A missing scroll is not simply absent. It represents a decision, a warning, a demarcated boundary. One can almost visualize the final scribe, not a martyr or a prophet, but a weary individual in a darkening scriptorium, holding a quill above the ultimate entry. Knowing that the number he was about to inscribe would resonate through centuries, he meticulously scratches it down. Lexarf. He then sets the pen aside, leaving 9 scrolls lighter, and the world, perhaps, 9 secrets poorer. Within the most ancient recesses of any archive, certain names invariably resonate longer than others. Not the celebrated figures, no grandmasters or inquisitors, but those inscribed haphazardly in margins, those whose handwriting never quite conforms to the official style. For the Templar scrolls, that name is Brother Amaric. He does not appear in trial transcripts. There is no record of a heroic demise, no confession extracted under torture, no execution date. Instead, there remains only a trail of ink, distinctive, densely packed, and undeniably vibrant. Across a dozen surviving manuscripts attributed to the Templar scriptorium at Aragon, Amaric left not only transcriptions, but also a unique set of annotations. Initially, these annotations appear innocuous, a question mark beside a verse from Revelation, a small triangle marking a calendar error. However, they subsequently become more peculiar. A comment adjacent to a list of liturgical chants reads, Vox duplicus lunae, the voice of the double moon. A faint symbol resembling a mirrored Templar cross appears in the bottom corner of one initiation scroll. On another, near the concluding line of an otherwise standard prayer, Amaric inscribed a curious phrase, Non est luce ni ignis interior, there is no light except the fire within. While monks historically exhibited their eccentricities, Latin scribes often doodled dragons, cats, or penned passive-aggressive critiques of their own ink. Amaric's notes possess a more discernible purpose. They are consistent, repetitive, coded, and, when arranged chronologically, another pattern emerges. The annotations appear to increase in frequency, then abruptly cease. Coinciding with this cessation, all trace of Amaric vanishes from historical records. His final known annotation appears in the margins of a scroll now housed in Zaragoza. It is written in a hand slightly less steady than before. The scroll itself contains an account of the 1291 retreat from Acre, yet Amaric entirely disregards the primary text, instead writing just 4 words, Paginis ignotus sed certis. The pages are unknown but certain. This fragment, loosely interpreted, has generated numerous pages of academic commentary. Some scholars contend he implied that specific texts, though lost, were historically authentic. Others believe he signaled that certain knowledge, despite its absence, remained indisputable in its truth. A third, more speculative school of thought views the phrase as a confession, that Amaric was aware of what had been redacted and perhaps even participated in the act. To comprehend this theory, one must examine beyond the annotations and into the structural integrity of the documents themselves. Some of the scrolls copied by Amaric exhibit non-standard line spacing, unusual gaps, and seemingly arbitrary breaks in the prose. Initially attributed to errors in parchment quality or age-related degradation, these gaps have since been digitally mapped by researchers exploring a long-standing hypothesis that Amaric was embedding a cipher. His final known annotation appears in the margins of a scroll now housed in Zaragoza. It is written in a hand slightly less steady than before. The scroll itself contains an account of the 1291 retreat from Acre, yet Amaric entirely disregards the primary text, instead writing just 4 words: Paginis ignotus sed certis. The pages are unknown but certain. Such findings possess a certain dramatic flair, and many scholars understandably remain skeptical, citing confirmation bias and pareidolia. Indeed, if one scrutinizes long enough, almost anything can be perceived as a treasure map. However, the cipher theory gained renewed momentum in 1998 when a previously overlooked fragment, an index sheet belonging to Amaric, was discovered bearing peculiar numbering. The folio sequence inexplicably jumped from 16 to 18, entirely omitting 17, but then listed folio 17 sideways with no content description, only the circled word tenebrae darkness. At this juncture, the narrative becomes even more obscure. A surviving letter from a Dominican scribe in Toulouse, dated 1309, expresses concern that certain Templar texts had fallen into the hands of individuals who would conceal poison in poetry. This phrase, poison in poetry, resonates with the tone of Amaric's cryptic insertions and even references a line from one of his notes, vers altis, hidden in verse. Did Amaric embed entire teachings within rhyme and meter? Were his marginal notes merely red herrings, designed to distract from a deeper concealment? Or was the code itself the message a warning, perhaps, or a trail deliberately left for those equipped to read in multiple layers? One theory proposes that he was documenting oral teachings deemed too perilous to commit explicitly to writing. In this perspective, the strange phrases served as mnemonic clues for an inner circle who had already memorized the actual content. One might envision a medieval Da Vinci Code, yet slower, more poignant, and considerably more fragile an individual attempting to communicate something in a whisper without uttering a sound. Also noteworthy is Amaric's recurring reference to Eastern symbols, which were not commonly recognized in Europe at that period. One scroll includes a doodled eye encased within a triangle, a symbol later associated with enlightenment, yet rare in Christian manuscripts prior to the 15th century. Another depicts what appears to be a serpent consuming its tail, the Ouroboros. While present in Gnostic and alchemical traditions, this symbol was considered perilous within ecclesiastical circles, deemed excessively cyclical and infinite. Yet, there it is, meticulously drawn beside a benediction. All of this would be more readily dismissed were it not for one final document. In 1624, a Jesuit archivist named Father Luis Benavides catalogued a scroll in Salamanca, now believed lost. His notes described a parchment fragment characterized by unusual spacing, non-standard Latin, and interlinear symbols. He remarked that it had previously been attributed to a Templar scribe of dubious repute, Americus. He then underlined a phrase, ignis in verbis latuit, the fire lay hidden in his words. Perhaps that is the ultimate key. Amaric was not writing a confession. He was crafting a literal matchbook, a single spark, meticulously placed, awaiting someone to ignite it centuries later. And perhaps, just perhaps, some of the missing pages were not erased at all. Perhaps they were never inscribed on the page in the first place, but instead reside within the spaces, the silences, the interstitial gaps between words, requiring only someone willing to read between the flames. The fire officially ignited just before dawn on June 10, 1308. The monastic community at the commandery in La Rochelle had been preparing for Mass when they detected a sharp, acrid smoke. Not the fragrance of incense, but something considerably darker. By the time local guards arrived, the scroll chamber had been utterly consumed. Not merely damaged, but entirely gone. The shelves had collapsed inwards, the timbers charred to their core, and a full 2 decades of scriptorium labor reduced to soot and dust. The official cause, a lightning strike. The local bailiff's record states it plainly, ignis de caelo. Yet, lightning rarely strikes with such repetitive precision. That year, 3 distinct Templar archives in France burned within a span of 10 weeks. Was this a pattern, or a mere coincidence? To the chroniclers of the era, divine punishment was the favored explanation. To contemporary historians, it evokes the unsettling impression of controlled demolition. 3 fires, 3 vaults, 3 locations primarily associated with scroll storage rather than treasure. Each site contained not wealth, but knowledge. Each site yielded the same tragic outcome, a repository of Templar writings reduced to ash just prior to the arrival of the Inquisition. The most revealing of these incidents may be the blaze at Leon, a smaller commandery not renowned for its military importance, but rather for its meticulous record-keeping. The fire erupted 2 nights after inquisitorial summonses were issued for the senior scribes. The Templars there had a mere 48 hours to present their records. 48 hours later, they possessed nothing left to display. A total loss, they claimed divine misfortune, or something more. A peculiar fragment from a trial deposition given in 1310 by a brother Hughes may offer a clue. When questioned about the Leon fire, he responded not with a denial, but with a metaphor. When a tree rots from within, he stated, sometimes it burns itself to preserve the forest. The inquisitors, accustomed to straightforward denials or coerced confessions, appeared perplexed by this response. It does not reappear in any subsequent interrogations, yet it persists in the margins of the official record, like an indelible smudge. There is another strange anomaly. In the surviving account of the La Rochelle fire, one monk recalled seeing men clad in black, leaving the scriptorium the night before the blaze, not the white mantles with red crosses of Templar brethren. Black garb was traditionally associated with Benedictines or inquisitors. His testimony was later dismissed as confused, attributed to excessive smoke and poor eyesight. However, another report from Sens, where a fire erupted under similar circumstances, described nearly identical observations, shadowy figures in cloaks, without distinguishing crosses or voices. This raises a disturbing possibility. Were these fires initiated by the enemies of the Templars, or by the order itself, in a desperate attempt to destroy what could not be defended? This debate fragments even the most cautious scholarship. One faction argues that these fires were acts of mercy rituals of internal self-purification intended to protect their brethren from being compelled to divulge truths under torture. Better, they contend, to let the parchment burn than to allow the scroll to become an instrument of execution. Others suggest the fires were fabrications, not actual events, but staged deceptions, part of a broader illusion designed to conceal the smuggling away rather than the destruction of certain scrolls. A ledger unearthed in Bruges in the 1700s lends credence to the latter theory. It enumerates shipments from La Rochelle in the week preceding the fire, including crates described not as weaponry or gold, but as sacrament inscriptus sacraments in writing. The phrase itself was unusual, rarely employed outside theological contexts. The shipment destination was coded, but a watermark suggests the crates traveled south, possibly towards Spain, or perhaps to a priory no longer marked on ecclesiastical maps. An additional layer of intrigue emerged in 1822, when a cache of melted lead seals was discovered buried in a garden just outside the ruins of the Sens commandery. Among them were fragments of a scroll tube, scorched yet unbroken. bearing the seal of Bertrand de Blancfort, one of the lesser-known Grand Masters. However, Blancfort had died in 1171. What was his seal doing on a tube buried in the early 1300s? Was it a forgery? Or had someone attempted to present newer writings as ancient, hoping to imbue them with an aura of forgotten legitimacy? Forgery, within this historical context, becomes an even more intricate subject, because certain texts such as the Rule of the Temple, the Rite of the Light, and the elusive Canto Nocturni have always had their authenticity questioned. While present in Gnostic and alchemical traditions, this symbol was considered perilous within ecclesiastical circles, deemed excessively cyclical and infinite. Yet, there it is, meticulously drawn beside a benediction. Not because they believed these to be true, but because they feared what would transpire if others did not believe. In this interpretation, the fires were not instruments of erasure, they were diversions, a magical sleight of hand burning one room to divert attention from a hidden cellar below. This concept finds some indirect support in the curious recurrence of the phrase "a libri absconditi," the hidden books in trial transcripts from multiple brothers. Each time, it was referenced vaguely, without naming specific titles. One man claimed that prior to the arrests, his commander had whispered, "They may take the vault, but not the hidden books." None of the accused, of course, could produce them, yet they all spoke as if these books had once been present, as if the order had always anticipated this moment, as if the fire had always been an integral part of their plan. While present in Gnostic and alchemical traditions, this symbol was considered perilous within ecclesiastical circles, deemed excessively cyclical and infinite. Yet, there it is, meticulously drawn beside a benediction. In a Parisian museum case, beneath thick glass and cool light, such a ghost exists. A blackened parchment fragment, curled by heat, too brittle to unroll. One line remains visible, partial Latin, just enough to read, "Quod ignimus, we chose the fire." A peculiar silence descends upon the Vatican archives, not the reverent hush of pilgrims or the resonant quiet of cathedral domes, but a muffled, cushioned stillness, one that feels deliberate, controlled. This is most palpable in the restricted index room, where not all manuscripts are outright forbidden, but some are decidedly inconvenient. Tucked behind red velvet cords, and within polished drawers, resides a document known only to a select few scholars as the Index Templarius Secreto, the Templar Blacklist. Its existence was first noted in a 15th century Vatican inventory, quietly acknowledged but never publicly advertised. It contained the names of specific scrolls and codices associated with the Knights Templar, texts deemed too dangerous, too heretical, or too politically volatile to circulate, even internally. These were not merely books lost to the ravages of time. They were systematically expunged from ecclesiastical record, not by fire or natural degradation, but by explicit decree. The Index Templarius Secreto enumerates 27 titles. Most are vague, even poetic. Liberus denomento, ordo interioris flammi. Others are chillingly precise. One is marked as containing the doctrine of inner divinity as it relates to the crucified king. Another refers to a scroll describing the ritual of consuming light beneath the moon's wane. And one, ominously bracketed in red ink, simply reads Tabula Fraternus, an instrument of reversal. There is no record of these scrolls ever having been submitted to any papal court. No trial transcript references them, no bishop's seal confirms their rejection. Yet here they are, quietly condemned, without the benefit of defense. It is as if the judicial process was bypassed, moving directly to pronouncement of sentence. The very presence of red ink narrates a story. Someone desired these names to be remembered, even as the physical pages themselves vanished. Even more remarkable is the uncanny correspondence between titles listed in the Index Templarius Secreto and fragments unearthed in entirely unrelated collections. A marginal note from a Cistercian copyist in the early 1300s complains of a Templar scroll bearing twisted psalms and lunar diagrams, a near-perfect match to Denimento, which references the moon's lost name sung backward in prayer. Another title, Ordo Interioris Flammi, appears in a Florentine book auction catalogue from the 1700s, described as a ritual of internal combustion for purification of the novice soul. That scroll has since disappeared, having been sold to an unnamed private collector and never seen again. Theories regarding the blacklist are as numerous as they are conflicting. Some suggest it was compiled by Pope Clement V himself, forming part of his uneasy compromise with Philip IV of France. The Pope, caught between allegiance to the Church and the relentless pressure of a vindictive French crown, may have sanctioned a purge of unfit texts to safeguard the Church from the political repercussions of the trials. Others point to Cardinal Bertrand de Got, Clement's advisor and later successor, as the true architect, a man known for his secretive disposition and fervent obsession with doctrinal purity. The Index Templarius Secreto enumerates 27 titles. Most are vague, even poetic. Liberus Denominto, Ordo Interioris Flammi. Others are chillingly precise. One is marked as containing the doctrine of inner divinity as it relates to the crucified king. Another refers to a scroll describing the ritual of consuming light beneath the moon's wane. And one, ominously bracketed in red ink, simply reads Tabula Fraternis, an instrument of reversal. If accurate, this would signify an astonishing level of self-awareness within the order, and an implicit admission that their scrolls might outpace their capacity for control. A 14th century Dominican friar, writing anonymously from Provence, supports this possibility. He describes encountering a Templar commander who steadfastly refused to read from a particular scroll, even under threat of excommunication, asserting that it speaks only to those prepared to abandon all anchors of reason. The friar concluded that madness had taken hold, yet his phrasing conveys awe more than fear. He records, "The scroll bore no name, only a circle, black, waxing, unbroken." Circles, naturally, appear frequently in the marginal symbols of other Templar texts, often juxtaposed with moons, flames, or mirrored eyes. Their precise meaning remains elusive, but the recurring motif suggests a shared internal language, a code of warning or reverence. The fact that the Index Templarius Secreto preserves these symbols, even as it condemns the texts they mark, may imply that the compiler of the list understood the language or once belonged to the inner circle. It would not be the first instance of the Church repurposing internal documents for its own mechanisms of control. The Inquisition itself extensively utilized heretical confessionals, co-opting the format while simultaneously condemning the content. To possess forbidden knowledge is dangerous, but to discern what to forbid requires an even deeper familiarity. The fundamental question persists. What precisely did these missing pages contain? Theories range from astrological rites to proto-Gnostic theology, from encoded bloodlines to liturgical inversions that reframe the Passion of Christ as a metaphor for personal transcendence. One fragment, allegedly copied from Liber Nocturnus, speaks of the fire within the vessel becoming the vessel itself. Mystical nonsense, perhaps, or a metaphor for something more radical. The replacement of church mediation with inner divine experience, which, in medieval terms, constitutes theological arson. And this may represent the true threat. Not demons, not clandestine deities, not esoteric geometry, but the disruptive idea that a Templar scroll could instruct a knight to bypass the church entirely, that salvation could be internalized, that Scripture's divinity stemmed not from its authorship, but from its readership. Such an idea, if widely disseminated, would have fundamentally undermined the very bedrock of clerical authority. It would have been unacceptable, dangerous, and in some respects, worse than heresy. It was independence. Thus, the blacklist fulfilled its purpose, not merely to erase the scrolls, but to ensure they would never be copied again, never whispered, never even contemplated. It was not necessary to incinerate every copy. It sufficed to convince enough individuals that the scrolls had been obliterated and that even the mere thought of them was perilous. Yet, Thoughts possess a tendency to leak. Whispers recur. Titles reappear in private collections, in antique catalogues, in the footnotes of long-forgotten letters. The pages themselves remain absent, but the names persist. And occasionally, when the names endure long enough, the pages ultimately follow. It appeared in a drawer, where it had no rightful place, tucked behind a bundle of diplomatic records from the reign of Pope John the 23rd. Nestled amidst mundane exchanges concerning cathedral repairs and episcopal appointments, it bore no grand seal, no protective binding. It was merely a single folded page, brittle and stained with age, and at its conclusion, a signature penned in careful, fading script. Bertrandis humilis servus Dei Bertrand, humble servant of God, better known to history as Pope Clement V. This letter should not exist, not in this archive, not in this format, and certainly not with its content. Dated 1307, just 2 weeks after the mass arrests of the Templars in France, the letter is addressed to my brother in Christ, Peter of Longris, a lesser-known bishop with close ties to Philip IV. The main body of the letter initially appears pastoral, with vague references to brotherly mercy and prayers for strength during trying times. However, a jarring shift then occurs. Clement writes, "As agreed, the pages deemed unsound are to be struck from the record. They shall not accompany the prisoners to Poitiers. They serve neither doctrine nor defense." Struck from the record, not examined, not judged, simply erased. One can readily grasp the implications. Thus, the blacklist fulfilled its purpose, not merely to erase the scrolls, but to ensure they would never be copied again, never whispered, never even contemplated. It was not necessary to incinerate every copy. It sufficed to convince enough individuals that the scrolls had been obliterated, and that even the mere thought of them was perilous. Yet, thoughts possess a tendency to leak. Whispers recur. It appeared in a drawer, where it had no rightful place, tucked behind a bundle of diplomatic records from the reign of Pope John the 23rd. Nestled amidst mundane exchanges concerning cathedral repairs and episcopal appointments, it bore no grand seal, no protective binding. If these pages, presumably scrolls or transcripts seized alongside the Templars, were deliberately excluded from official proceedings by papal instruction, then much of what we purport to know about the trials is filtered through a conscious absence. The letter suggests not merely political maneuvering, but editorial manipulation, fundamentally reframing the entire narrative. The Templars were not simply subjected to trial, their defense was preemptively disarmed. One passage from the letter mentions the matter of the Eastern wisdom, a phrase that appears nowhere else in contemporaneous church documents. This alone suffices to provoke theories, some plausible, others uncomfortably speculative. Was this a reference to Gnostic influence, Sufi mysticism, or to the rumored Codex Orientalis, an alleged Templar document describing their encounters with various sects during the Crusades, including teachings not easily reconcilable with Roman doctrine? A copy of that codex has never surfaced, yet descriptions of it have. Most notably, a 17th century Jesuit catalogue lists a black book with brass clasps confiscated from a private collector in Toulouse. It was destroyed, according to a marginal note, for errors concerning the Word made flesh, another tantalizing link in a chain of vanished context. Even in the absence of the codex itself, the Clement letter casts a long shadow. For one, it suggests that church officials were aware that certain scrolls or pages were unsound, meaning either dangerous, doctrinally deviant, or politically embarrassing, and rather than confront them, discreetly removed them from circulation. No trial, no record, simply gone. This brings to mind a particularly perplexing element from the Chinon parchment. While the main document grants absolution to the Templar leadership, it references earlier confessions not submitted for review. For years, historians presumed this referred to hearsay or procedural missteps. But what if those confessions were authentic, documented, and simply discarded? There is another subtle connection in a separate ledger from Avignon, dated 1311. A scribe notes that 3 scrolls relevant to the recent tribunal were removed for ecclesiastical sanitation. The term is as vague as it is chilling. Sanitation of thought, sanitation of memory. And who authorized this removal? The list of what was excluded begins to carry more significance than what remains. Even more curious is the fact that the Clement letter, despite its implications, does not deny the scrolls' existence. It affirms them, validates them, if only by reference. This signifies that the Church possessed knowledge and chose silence. One detail in the letter is particularly striking, not for its content, but for its handwriting. The final sentence, following the formal sign-off, appears to have been added later. It is in a different ink, penned with a more frantic hand. It reads, "The brother from Cyprus has not returned. If he carries a copy, we must pray it falls into silence." A brother from Cyprus, not a cardinal, not a courtier, but a brother, likely a Templar, possibly one of those who eluded arrest. And if he carried a copy, then somewhere, even now, that missing page might still exist. This concept resonates with an ancient theory among archivists, that the more dangerous a document, the more probable its survival, not due to its content, but due to the fear it inspires. Individuals do not destroy what terrifies them. They enter it far away, deep underground, encoded in language, in cipher. Thus, the letter that should not exist transforms into a kind of map, a subtle signpost leading toward the lacunae in the historical record, the spaces where history paused and the words were deliberately withdrawn. One can almost hear them now, whispering just beyond the periphery of the page. He never raised his voice, never overturned a table, never stormed from a tribunal in protest, nor penned an angry treatise in exile. Guillaume Imbert, Inquisitor of Poitiers, left behind only silence, a highly curated, carefully punctuated silence, until one slim folio surfaced in the archives of Lyon. It bore no title, no cover, just 33 pages of handwritten notes, undated, unsigned, and clearly never intended for eyes beyond the church. Yet, the handwriting matches known samples from Guillaume's trial transcripts, marginalia compared to inked statements, exhibiting the same characteristic flourish in his lowercase g, and the same peculiar tilt in his capital R. This renders the content problematic, for Inquisitor Imbert, despite his unwavering loyalty and procedural diligence, apparently began to harbor doubts. The folio is a curious amalgamation of summary and introspection. Some pages read like meeting minutes, while others diverge into personal meditation. He characterizes the Templars as fractured and confused, yet not utterly lost. In one entry, he notes that the scrolls brought forth today differ from the earlier accounts, language less fevered. One even bears resemblance to the minor prophets. That final line attracted considerable attention when the folio was discreetly circulated among a handful of clerics in the early 1900s. The implication that Templar writings held theological parallels to canonical scripture was dangerous, damning, or perhaps even divine. In another passage, Imbert records a moment during interrogation when a Templar prisoner, whose name has been redacted, began to recite from memory a passage not known in our Gospel. The Inquisitor writes, "He spoke calmly, as though he were delivering a psalm. I asked him to stop. He smiled, then quoted another line. The scribe's quill hovered, but did not commit it to writing." This image lingers a moment when something significant was articulated and intentionally omitted from the official record. There is also a notation that simply reads, "A scroll bearing a sun within the cross, written in Aramaic and something else, burned before I arrived." It does not specify who ordered the burning, but the phrase "before I arrived" carries considerable weight, as if Guillaume suspected that some scrolls were destroyed not in judgment, but in fear, or, more disturbingly, as a strategic maneuver. Guillaume's folio also includes a page that has been largely obliterated by scratching, yet beneath the abraded surface, spectral ink remains, forming a single, almost legible line. "Let none know I have written this. Not even him. Him, the capitalized initial, implies either God or the Pope. In either case, Guillaume was evidently apprehensive, and perhaps with good reason, because among the scrolls reviewed during the early Poitiers interrogations, Guillaume references one he calls Veritas Ultima, the final truth. This text is not mentioned in any other trial documentation. It does not appear in the Paris or Chinon inventories. Yet, in his notes, Guillaume describes it as a recitation, lyrical in tone, without known author, detailing the last rite of the initiates and the veil drawn between flesh and flame. No known copy of this text exists, yet fragments of similar phrasing appear in later mystical treatises from Spain and southern France, including one attributed to a group of exiled monks who claimed descent from the true guardians of the Western Fire, a poetic phrase, or perhaps a ciphered lineage. It was Veritas Ultima, according to Guillaume, that caused him to hesitate. He writes, "There are lines within it that echo the Psalter, lines that ring truer than the accusations." He does not deny the other charges, he does not absolve the order, but he acknowledges something rare for an inquisitor, the possibility that some of the scrolls were not heresy, but something older or deeper. The context becomes more intricate when one recalls the earlier fires La Rochelle, Laon, Sens. Guillaume had access to what survived those losses. His notes confirm he examined scorched scrolls, damaged by smoke but partially legible. In those scrolls, he references diagrams reminiscent of Enochian structures, circular patterns with concentric symbols. Enochian imagery was common in angelology, but considered fringe by the Church, and certainly not something a Templar knight was expected to doodle in his prayer book. What becomes evident as one follows Guillaume's quiet rebellion is that he was not attempting to save the Templars as an organization. He was striving to comprehend them, not the structure, but the thought, the theology, the incandescent core behind the ritual. And here, the callbacks begin to coalesce. The scroll Amharic annotated with non-legata hoc periculos est, the pages excised from the Paris inventory without stated reason, the Clement letter imploring silence concerning the Eastern wisdom. All these threads converge toward a small corpus of writings that were not strident or violent, but whispered truths too close to the uncomforting reality. Guillaume concludes his notes with a final page, entirely blank save for a single Latin phrase centrally inscribed, Saepe veritas melius latet. Truth often hides better. There is something both weary and defiant in this statement, as though he understood that history would efface his doubts like ink in the rain. And he was correct. His folio was never cited in subsequent ecclesiastical reviews. It lay dormant in the Lyon archives until a graduate student, misfiling a 19th century church register, opened the incorrect drawer. What is paramount is that someone preserved it. Someone chose not to discard it. And in that act, quiet and almost forgettable, Guillaume's rebellion endured, not as a public protest, not as martyrdom, but as memory, a final breath held just long enough to reach us. The designation surfaces infrequently, and always as whispers, Secretum Templi, the secret of the temple. It appears only 4 times in the surviving medieval record, and each instance is marked by deliberate vagueness, never quoted, never described, always hinted at as something perilous, something strictly off-limits, even among those already deeply immersed in sacred mysteries. The most direct reference emanates from a 1312 letter composed by Archbishop Guillaume de Nogaret to a papal envoy in Toulouse. The letter is concise, administrative, and entirely focused on the dissolution of Templar holdings until the postscript. Scrawled at the bottom, and clearly added in haste, are 9 words. The codex remains unaccounted for. It bears no seal, no title, no location, merely that the codex. However, the envelope preserved alongside the letter was marked with an unusual glyph, 2 interlocking crosses flanked by suns, a symbol matching only one other known source. The carved stone seal discovered above the destroyed library at the Templar stronghold in Béziers. It is there that the investigative trail commences. According to one account, When Philip IV's forces seized Béziers, they anticipated finding gold. What they discovered instead was a library, dozens of scroll tubes, bound volumes, and 4 heavily reinforced wooden cases with brass locks. 3 were immediately opened. The 4th, marked only with the word Ordo, vanished. It does not appear on the seizure ledger. No court ever enumerated its contents. However, a Dominican archivist, writing 30 years later, noted that the chest containing the secretum was lost or never found. His deliberate choice of the word secretum has become the linchpin for those who believe the codex was authentic. If it was, then it may have constituted the most closely guarded manuscript within the Templar order. Its alleged contents represent a synthesis, a compendium, not a single text, but an intricately woven collection of the order's most esoteric writings, theological speculation, diagrams of initiation rites, and even first-hand accounts of what Templar emissaries had learned from their contact with the East. Some describe it as a mirror book, composed of 2 halves, one visible, the other requiring symbolic decoding through ritual experience. Others believe it contained no doctrine at all, but rather a ciphered map, not of terrestrial geography, but of consciousness, a method of spiritual ascent veiled in chivalric metaphor. The designation surfaces infrequently, and always as whispers, Secretum Templi, the secret of the temple. It appears only 4 times in the surviving medieval record, and each instance is marked by deliberate vagueness, never quoted, never described, always hinted at as something perilous, something strictly off-limits, even among those already deeply immersed in sacred mysteries. According to one account, when Philip IV's forces seized Béziers, they anticipated finding gold. What they discovered instead was a library, dozens of scroll tubes, bound volumes, and 4 heavily reinforced wooden cases with brass locks. 3 were immediately opened. The 4th, marked only with the word Ordo, vanished. It does not appear on the seizure ledger. No court ever enumerated its contents. These echoes, separated by more than a century and originating from disparate regions, suggest either a shared mythos or a tangible object whose nature defied standard documentation. In 1472, a Benedictine monk named Hugo Furios penned a peculiar commentary on texts that were meant to be recited, not read. He names no specific sources but refers to a book of the inner rule that was as smoke in the hand glimpsed, then lost. This poetic phrase takes on new significance when one considers the identical language appearing in a 14th century parchment fragment from Salamanca. The book was not for sight, only breath. Its presence in a Templar context suggests an intentional borrowing from non-canonical sources, which, if true, would explain why the codex had to vanish. Inquisitors harbored little patience for theological creativity. The Templars were already accused of embracing foreign rites and unorthodox symbols, a text openly synthesizing Christian and Eastern mysticism, potentially even Gnostic ideas, would have sealed their fate more rapidly than any heretical confession. However, perhaps that was precisely the objective. One speculative theory, controversial even within fringe academia, posits that Secretum Templi was not lost. It was deliberately planted, left behind intentionally for the Inquisition to discover not as a defense, but as a decoy. It was a compilation of fragments designed to confuse, to overwhelm, to cast doubt upon the very narrative being constructed against the Order, functioning as a kind of paper labyrinth. If one's adversaries cannot follow the trail, perhaps they cease the pursuit. Alternatively, perhaps the Codex was not intended for the Inquisition at all. Some researchers believe Secretum Templi was created in the final years preceding the arrests, a last gesture of synthesis by a faction within the Templars desperate to preserve their legacy. They could not preserve the Order, but perhaps they could encode its essence into a single, enduring manuscript, not indestructible in its physical form, but in its meaning copyable only through comprehension, legible only through ritual. The parallels to Amaric's coded scrolls are undeniable. The mirrored crosses, the references to ignis interior, the inner fire, the concept that what matters is not merely the text on the page, but what is awakened by the act of reading. The Codex, therefore, is not merely a book. It is a key, a portal, and those without the requisite training to open it would find nothing but poetic nonsense. One final clue originates from the 19th century. A German bookseller named Gustav Reinke recorded in his journal the acquisition of a peculiar volume from a French estate sale, bound in dark leather, unmarked, and filled with indecipherable Latin verse and geometric illustrations. He noted that the final page contained a single phrase, "The temple sleeps within." Reinke died shortly thereafter, and the book was never catalogued. Coincidence is a likely explanation. It lay dormant in the Lyon archives until a graduate student, misfiling a 19th century church register, opened the incorrect drawer. What is paramount is that someone preserved it, someone chose not to discard it. And in that act, quiet and almost forgettable, Guillaume's rebellion endured, not as a public protest, not as martyrdom, but as memory, a final breath held just long enough to reach us. And sometimes, the scroll is not truly lost. It is simply not yet prepared to be read. They were intended to be eradicated, extinguished like a torch plunged into water, on the night of October 13th, 1307, when Philip IV's comprehensive sweep across France commenced. It was designed to be total, simultaneous, and surgically precise. Thousands of knights, commanderies, scribes, horses, and relics were to be seized in one coordinated strike. Yet, it did not entirely succeed. Some Templars vanished, not merely fled, but utterly disappeared. And according to certain overlooked testimonies and correspondences, they did not escape empty-handed. They carried scrolls. The first faint whisper appears in an unexpected location, a 1,310 inventory from the Abbey of Montaigon, a quiet, secluded Benedictine monastery not known for dramatic events and not involved in the Templar trials. Yet, one entry, buried beneath a list of bequests, raises questions. One sealed case arrived in haste, not opened, delivered by brethren, cloaked in white, without banner. That is all. No contents are listed, no follow-up. The case is never mentioned again. Then there is the confession of Brother Gerard of Rodez. Under duress, and clearly terrified, he informed inquisitors that on the night prior to the arrests, 2 carts bearing wax-sealed tubes and copper-rimmed scrolls were escorted by silent riders westward, towards the sea. They said nothing, he recalled, only that the weight must reach the water before dawn. The inquisitors pressed him for names. He provided none. They wore no marks, only rings. This line was struck from later transcripts but preserved in a marginal note. Sigma digitorum probata, rings of proof. The notion that Templars escaped with scrolls is controversial, primarily because it disrupts the neat, satisfying symmetry of their downfall. If the order perished definitively, then the threat was concluded, contained, rendered safe. However, if some members escaped, particularly those entrusted with preserving knowledge, then their ideas may have taken root elsewhere, nurtured by secrecy and sustained by absence. This same motif is observed in Catalan records. In December 1307, a ship departed from the port of Collior under questionable paperwork, registered to no known order, bound for the Balearic Islands. Its listed cargo, grain and tallow. Yet, the harbour master's log includes a scribbled addendum. Tubes and cases, hand-bound, no stamp. More significantly, the ship's captain, one Raymond Amaric, later appears in Aragonese court papers connected to a shipment of ecclesiastical materials of Eastern origin. This pattern continues. An English priory in Templecombe received, without explanation, 3 visitors from the old house of La Rochelle in 1308. A clerk noted that they brought nothing but silence and satchels. The priory itself would later be linked to the famous Templecombe head, a painted panel discovered centuries later beneath the floorboards, depicting a bearded, enigmatic figure that some claim resembles the Shroud of Turin. No scrolls were found, but always the subtle implication of something smuggled, something meticulously protected. The implications extend beyond mere romanticism. If these scribes, these so-called ink-bearers, indeed fled with actual Templar texts, then the documents that ostensibly perished in the La Rochelle fire may not have burned at all. They may have sailed. And if they sailed, where did they land? Cyprus presents itself as an obvious answer. The island served as one of the Templars' final strongholds, and even after the official dissolution, it remained a sanctuary for those who refused to relinquish their vows. Reports from Venetian traders mention cloaked knights appearing in Limassol with strange Eastern books. One scribe refers to a manuscript that bore symbols of Solomon's ring and the double cross. These echoes, separated by more than a century and originating from disparate regions, suggest either a shared mythos or a tangible object whose nature defied standard documentation. However, the trail does not conclude there. In Portugal, under the protection of King Dinis, the Templars were not crushed but quietly transformed, becoming the Order of Christ, the same men, under a new designation. And the Order's early archives, still largely inaccessible, contain dozens of entries labeled Documenta Translata. One entry, dated 1313, lists 4 scrolls in foreign hand, unsorted, awaiting copying. These entries disappear after 1315. Perhaps they were copied. Perhaps they were concealed once more. The theory that these ink-bearers were not random escapees but part of a larger, coordinated strategy gains traction when examined alongside a peculiar memo written by Jacques de Molay in 1306, a year prior to his arrest. In it, he refers obliquely to those who will carry the flame westward should the tower fall. Not gold, not relics the flame. Could that flame have been the Order's hidden writings, its unorthodox theology, its knowledge absorbed from Eastern mystics and never fully accepted by Rome? Recall also the anonymous Jesuit memoir discovered in Toledo, which referenced a relic of paper worth a kingdom. The author claimed it had been passed down through silent hands, safeguarded not because of its content, but because of its inherent danger. The memoir refers to it as the word that undoes the crown. There is even an apocryphal legend, almost certainly exaggerated yet persistent, of a knight arriving in Scotland by boat, clutching a scroll sealed in pitch. He presented it to a local abbot, who read it and then immediately bricked it into the chapel wall. Centuries later, during renovations, a hidden niche was discovered. It was empty. Empty niches are a recurring motif in Templar investigations. Scroll tubes devoid of scrolls, chests with broken locks, spaces where something once resided, or perhaps still does. The narrative of the ink-bearers complicates the established story. It suggests intention, coordination, that when the flames arose, not everyone succumbed to panic. Some possessed a plan, and if the scrolls survived, either wholly or in part, then the Order's silence was not a failure, it was an act of discipline. What became of the scrolls they carried? Did they persist in private hands? Were they transcribed into cipher and assimilated into other traditions? Did they, even indirectly, inspire the emergence of orders like the Rosicrucians or the Freemasons, who seemed to materialize from obscurity bearing strikingly familiar rites? Or did they simply vanish again, awaiting another moment of crisis, another set of hands willing to transport them westward? One certainty remains. When the Templar network collapsed, it did not fall like a monolithic tower. It scattered like sparks. Some of those sparks extinguished, yet others found purchase somewhere. October 13th, 1307, marks a date deeply etched into the annals of history, remembered for the arrests, the trials, the commencement of the end. Yet, perhaps something else occurred that day, or rather, failed to occur. In the port city of La Rochelle, France, the docks were unusually quiet, suspiciously so. For a harbor that routinely accommodated dozens of ships, many belonging to the Templars, records indicate a sudden and inexplicable absence. No cargo was loaded, no routine shipments were logged, and no departures were recorded. Nevertheless, multiple accounts speak of a fleet observed departing just before dawn. Naturally, the absence of evidence does not constitute evidence of absence. Yet, the pervasive silence surrounding the Templar fleet has long captivated researchers. A handful of contemporary documents, typically dismissed by official historians, suggest that as many as 18 ships vanished without trace. No cargo manifests, no names, simply gone. The only physical clue is a port log, torn and water-stained, recovered from the archives of an ancient priory in Saint-Jean d'Angely. It lists vessels assigned to the Templar commandery at La Rochelle. Some entries include arrival dates, others do not. Several are marked with peculiar annotations. Nox Aegrae departed by night. Others are simply labeled non-visus post diem tertium not seen after the third day. The official church position maintains that the Templars possessed no functional fleet at that time, having supposedly lost their coastal power. However, local records suggest otherwise. Merchant accounts from 1306 still document payments made to Templar captains for shipping wine, wool, and even exotic goods from Cyprus and the Levant. One contract, issued just months prior to the arrests, names a ship called Falconius Lux, the Light of the Falcon, whose home port was La Rochelle, and whose crew was entirely composed of men of the Temple. That ship is never mentioned again. Speculation has filled this void. Some assert that the Templars received advance warning of the arrests and utilized their ships to flee. Others contend that the fleet was merely a ghost story, invented later by romanticists eager for mystery. Yet, certain threads resist unraveling. An Aragonese sailor's account, recorded in 1310 and discovered in the Zaragoza archives, describes sighting white sails bearing red crosses near the mouth of the Ebro River. This sighting occurred weeks after the arrests. He reported it to a local commander, believing them to be lost crusaders. His report was disregarded, but in his own words, they sailed west, not east, toward the horizon, toward a place beyond maps. That same year, a Venetian record indicates a sudden surge in demand for ink, vellum, and scroll tubes among merchants dealing with Portuguese clients under Templar protection. The scrolls themselves were never observed, but someone, somewhere, required these materials, and quickly, Portugal, once again, becomes a focal point. Under King Dinis, the Templars were not eradicated but rebranded. Their fleet, if it indeed existed, may have found sanctuary there. The founding of the Order of Christ, successor to the Templars in Portugal, occurred just a few years later, and its initial members were former Templars, many of whom possessed naval experience. Coincidence or continuity? If the missing fleet did transport scrolls, then their disappearance was not a retreat. It was an act of preservation. The very act of vanishing may have been their ultimate ritual. This theory gains further weight when considered alongside an obscure entry in the Vatican's Liber Curia, the Book of the Curia, where an unnamed informant speaks of a treasure, not of gold, but of word and breath, borne by ship to the mouth of the setting Sunday. The poetic phrasing garnered little attention at the time, but word and breath strongly suggests scrolls. It is pertinent here to recall the testimony of Brother Gerard from Rodez, the terrified individual who claimed to witness carts being loaded with wax-sealed scrolls and sent westward to the water. His account was dismissed as hysteria, the ravings of a man succumbing to pressure. But what if he was not alone? What if he was the last to see the scrolls before they boarded the ships? The concept of knowledge sailing into oblivion feels like myth. Yet, the Templars were nothing if not theatrical. Their rituals were veiled, their doctrine encrypted, their movements designed for survival through secrecy. A fleet disappearing under cover of darkness would be entirely consistent with their character, less a panic, more a pilgrimage. And some assert that the ships never reached Portugal. One legend, considered fanciful but persistent, places the fleet further west, far beyond Iberia, Iceland, the Canaries, even the shores of Scotland. In one version, a single ship landed near Mull and delivered a sealed chest to a monastic outpost whose ruins still stand, wind-lashed and largely forgotten. In another, the fleet divided, half heading west, half south, each bearing portions of a fragmented archive, ensuring that no single location could ever again hold the complete truth. Then there is the Templar chart found in the 1700s, an ancient map discovered beneath the floorboards of a Portuguese chapel. It depicted no continents, only stars, lines crossing an ocean, devoid of names, marked only by symbols, the same symbols found on scroll seals described in earlier chapters, mirrored crosses, the Ouroboros, the circle within a circle. The implication, the fleet was not following a trade route, it was following an alignment, a celestial path. As always, this invites wild interpretations. That the scrolls contained prophecies, that the fleet carried instructions for spiritual elevation timed to cosmic events, that it was not merely ink they transported, but a calendar, a moment yet to come. Far-fetched, perhaps. This sighting occurred weeks after the arrests. He reported it to a local commander, believing them to be lost crusaders. His report was disregarded, but in his own words, they sailed west, not east, toward the horizon, toward a place beyond maps. That same year, a Venetian record indicates a sudden surge in demand for ink, vellum, and scroll tubes among merchants dealing with Portuguese clients under Templar protection. This sighting occurred weeks after the arrests. He reported it to a local commander, believing them to be lost crusaders. His report was disregarded, but in his own words, they sailed west, not east, toward the horizon, toward a place beyond maps. That same year, a Venetian record indicates a sudden surge in demand for ink, vellum, and scroll tubes among merchants dealing with Portuguese clients under Templar protection. Then there is the Templar chart found in the 1700s, an ancient map discovered beneath the floorboards of a Portuguese chapel. It depicted no continents, only stars, lines crossing an ocean, devoid of names, marked only by symbols, the same symbols found on scroll seals described in earlier chapters, mirrored crosses, the Ouroboros, the circle within a circle. The implication, the fleet was not following a trade route, it was following an alignment, a celestial path. One discovers them inadvertently, odd little phrases in merchant ledgers, initials that do not correspond to known sailors, purchases of oil and parchment in towns far from Scriptoria. They claim the Templar fleet disappeared, but perhaps it did not. Perhaps it simply turned its sails toward the one horizon. The church could not follow the one lined not with fire, but with silence. The island archive theory commences with an anonymous letter dated 1313, discovered in a box of unrelated shipping manifests within the Genoa city archive. The letter is unsigned, penned in a hurried hand, and addressed to an individual simply identified as Dominus G. It reads, "The remainder of the work is secured west of Limassol, under the old stone. They will not look where no fire has fallen." Most interpretations connect this to Cyprus, specifically the now ruined commandery of Colossae, once a sugar fortress, later a Templar enclave, and perpetually rumored to possess deeper cellars than official maps indicate. Excavations beneath Colossae in the 1990 seconds revealed bricked-up passages whose purpose remains unknown. One chamber contained shattered wine jars and rusted armor fragments, but no scrolls. Or perhaps, more poetically, they were left in plain sight, disguised in liturgical language, masked in metaphor, sleeping behind words no one interprets anymore. The islands are quiet now, but islands retain memory, and stone does not forget. Majorca enters the theory through a more poetic route. A Catalan poem from the late 1300s describes white men from the east bearing tubes of night and sun, their ship vanishing like the owl beneath the temple moon. Interpreted literally, this makes no sense, but tubes of night and sun evokes a powerful metaphor for scrolls, containing both darkness and illumination. Furthermore, in 1384, a Majorcan priest wrote to the Bishop of Tarragona about old letters in foreign hand stored in the sanctuary's undercroft, untouched since the bearded ones passed through. The term barbati, or bearded, was frequently used in late medieval texts to describe Templars. Nevertheless, the mere fact that the Templars maintained a fortified presence on the island long after their suppression elsewhere suggests it was not merely a strategic outpost. It functioned as a storehouse, perhaps even a final refuge for knowledge that could not venture further west. Coincidence or signature? Skeptics argue that if the Templars had truly hidden their archive, it would have been discovered by now. However, scrolls do not behave like treasure. They decay. They seek dry, secluded spaces. They blend into other texts. And the true protection is not always location. It is obscurity. If one does not know precisely what to seek, one will inadvertently overlook it. And some suggest that this has already occurred. In 1908, a French scholar named Émile Moreau claimed to have discovered a partial Templar scroll on the island of Gozo, near Malta. The scroll was incomplete, just a sliver of parchment wrapped around a bone cylinder, yet it bore a phrase not found in any known Latin liturgy. Ad lucem intravitim, and the light entered without voice. The parchment subsequently vanished from public record after Moreau's death. The official church position maintains that the Templars possessed no functional fleet at that time, having supposedly lost their coastal power. However, local records suggest otherwise. Merchant accounts from 1306 still document payments made to Templar captains for shipping wine, wool, and even exotic goods from Cyprus and the Levant. A consistent pattern begins to form. Wherever the church's influence was potent, the scrolls vanished. But on islands where ecclesiastical authority was diluted by geography, by political considerations, or by quiet complicity, rumors of preserved Templar texts persist. Even more curious is the account of a Portuguese sailor named Álvaro de Alvares, who in 1341 wrote that he encountered a Brotherhood of the Old Cross residing among the hills of Madeira. Madeira would not be officially discovered for another 60 years, at least according to accepted history. Yet, Álvaro describes a small stone chapel, empty save for a table of flame and a book no one dared open. His story was dismissed by contemporaries as the drunken fantasy of a superstitious mariner. However, his phrasing, Brotherhood of the Old Cross, is an exact match for how Templars were described in Eastern chronicles from the 12th century. In 1908, a French scholar named Émile Moreau claimed to have discovered a partial Templar scroll on the island of Gozo, near Malta. The scroll was incomplete, just a sliver of parchment wrapped around a bone cylinder, yet it bore a phrase not found in any known Latin liturgy. Ad lucem intravitim, and the light entered without voice. The parchment subsequently vanished from public record after Moreau's death. Early Masonic rituals include repeated references to a vault of 7 winds, a term found in no biblical text, yet echoed in the alleged scroll of flame. One of the texts believed to have been part of Secretum Templi. That scroll was said to contain a map of the body overlaid with the zodiac, a blending of Christian mysticism and Eastern cosmology, too unusual to be mere doctrine, too specific to be mere coincidence. Thus, the theory persists that the scrolls, or at least copies thereof, still exist not within glass cases or museums, but in stone chambers beneath forgotten sanctuaries, misfiled in secluded monasteries, or discreetly guarded by brotherhoods who no longer recall the exact nature of what they protect. Perhaps one resides in a cellar, tightly rolled inside a forgotten vase, another tucked behind a false panel in an ancient altar, and some assert that the ships never reached Portugal. One legend, considered fanciful but persistent, places the fleet further west, far beyond Iberia, Iceland, the Canaries, even the shores of Scotland. In one version, a single ship landed near Mull and delivered a sealed chest to a monastic outpost whose ruins still stand, wind-lashed and largely forgotten. The process invariably commences with a handshake, a peculiar grip palm pressed to wrist. thumb positioned precisely. This is followed by a phrase, often in Latin or something designed to approximate Latin, succeeded by a series of symbols etched into stone or stitched onto aprons. These gestures, seemingly innocuous, even quaint, represent the remnants of something more ancient, perhaps considerably more ancient. If any of this holds true, then the scrolls may have been divided, not stored in a single location, but dispersed across a constellation of safe harbors, some in Cyprus, others in Sardinia, Majorca, Malta, even the Azores scattered like seeds. This would have constituted a clever insurance policy: destroy one location and the others remain. The island archive theory also directly connects to the evolution of esoteric orders. Nevertheless, the mere fact that the Templars maintained a fortified presence on the island long after their suppression elsewhere suggests it was not merely a strategic outpost. It functioned as a storehouse, perhaps even a final refuge for knowledge that could not venture further west. Described in ritual texts as a guiding light, often associated with divine knowledge, it is said to be visible only to the worthy, those who have undergone trials and maintained silence. This closely mirrors a line found in a Templar initiation fragment recovered from the ruins of a collapsed commandery in Aragon. The star is not above, but within. It burns not in the sky, but in the brother. The phrasing differs, certainly, but the core essence, inner illumination safeguarded by ritual progression, is hauntingly similar. Then there is the Masonic practice of tracing boards, large symbolic diagrams drawn in chalk or ink on the lodge floor before ceremonies commence. These boards frequently depict staircases, compasses, suns, moons, and occasionally a figure holding a scroll. In certain rites, the scroll is labeled Lux Veritatis, the light of truth. No biblical passage employs that exact phrase, yet it appears in a marginal note in one of Amaric's surviving scrolls. Adjacent to it, a diagram of interlocking triangles and a single, unblinking eye. One might dismiss this as mere coincidence. Described in ritual texts as a guiding light, often associated with divine knowledge, it is said to be visible only to the worthy, those who have undergone trials and maintained silence. This closely mirrors a line found in a Templar initiation fragment recovered from the ruins of a collapsed commandery in Aragon. The star is not above, but within. It burns not in the sky, but in the brother. More substantial than poetry is the case of the Carta de Ischia, a navigational map dated 1315, which includes an unusual marking off the coast of Sardinia. A small, unnamed island is annotated with a Latin phrase, Custodia Scriptorum, guard of the writings. No settlement is listed, no monastery, merely a symbol, a triangle within a circle. That identical symbol appears in a marginal doodle in one of Amaric's surviving scrolls. More substantial than poetry is the case of the Carta de Ischia, a navigational map dated 1315, which includes an unusual marking off the coast of Sardinia. A small, unnamed island is annotated with a Latin phrase, Custodia Scriptorum, guard of the writings. No settlement is listed, no monastery, merely a symbol, a triangle within a circle. That identical symbol appears in a marginal doodle in one of Amaric's surviving scrolls. Or one might consider another fragment, a page torn from a 14th century Parisian alchemical journal, unsigned, yet referencing a ritual preserved by the Silent Ones. It details an initiation process involving 3 degrees of knowledge, a veiled oath, and a symbolic death, all key features of early speculative masonry. Yet, this fragment predates formal Masonic lodges by at least 2 centuries. The Silent Ones, the text states, spoke by symbol and remembered only what could not be written. Naturally, critics of this theory argue that Freemasonry, as it emerged in the 17th century, was a product of Enlightenment ideals, not medieval mysticism. They point to guild roots, to Renaissance humanism, to Hermetic influence. And yet, the stubborn recurrence of Templar motifs within Masonic structures cannot be easily dismissed. the double-headed eagle, the red cross, the 13-step staircase, the emphasis on brotherhood, secrecy, and the pursuit of ancient light. Even the use of the term Grand Architect, a title found in a Templar fragment, referencing the divine creator, not as a king or judge, but as a builder, Architectus Mundi, the architect of the world. Some Masonic lodges in France and Portugal claim unbroken descent from surviving Templars. These claims are largely ceremonial, representing more mythology than verifiable history. But again, they persist. One Portuguese rite, practiced only in a single lodge in Tomar, commences with the phrase, "Let the stone remember the fire." However, perhaps the most compelling thread connecting Freemasonry to the missing Templar texts lies in the so-called Master's Word. In Masonic legend, this is a secret name of God, or of knowledge, or of something else, that is lost during the construction of Solomon's temple and must be recovered by the initiate through moral purification and symbolic death. This description could eerily apply just as readily to the later rituals of Masonry as to the esoteric Templar orders. One partial description of that scroll, preserved in a letter to Cardinal Bertrand, refers to a man walking within a spiral beneath the gaze of the seven fires. That same imagery is preserved in a Masonic ritual from the Rite of Memphis Mizraim, which includes the line, "He enters the spiral crowned by stars, feet in fire, eyes in stone." Coincidence after coincidence becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss. Then there is the curious appearance of specific geometric figures, the vesica piscis, the hexagram, and the spiral, all of which appear in early Masonic tracing boards, and, more obscurely, in diagrams from the Scroll of the Veil, a now lost Templar manuscript, rumored to contain cosmological visions and metaphysical correspondences between the body and the heavens. And what if those scrolls, long presumed lost, were not destroyed or buried in island archives, but encoded into living ceremonies, concealed not in stone, but in gesture, preserved not in vaults, but in the minds of men who never knew the origin of the ideas, only that they were sacred? In that light, the Masons do not possess the Templar secret. They are the secret. The investigation commences with a solitary phrase, 5 words barely discernible on a crumbling sheet of parchment, unearthed beneath a church floor in Poitou. Evangelium per eos reclusum. The Gospel was concealed by them. The document from which it originates, fragmented and charred at its edges, is written in Latin, yet interspersed with Greek and Syriac phrases. It lays no claim to authorship, no attribution to any evangelist, merely a flicker of text rapidly fading into dust. Yet, that single line has haunted historians for centuries. For if the Templars ever possessed a gospel not sanctioned by the Church, an alternative account of Christ's words, a suppressed testimony to his life, or, more significantly, a reinterpretation of his meaning, then, the stakes associated with the missing scrolls would multiply tenfold. The discourse would no longer pertain to mere ritual or doctrine. It would concern scripture, canon, and revelation. And the question no one dares voice too loudly: did the Templars attempt to rewrite the gospel? The so-called redacted gospel remains more theory than tangible artifact. No complete version has ever surfaced, only scraps, suggestions, hints buried within unrelated manuscripts. However, when meticulously pieced together, as both scholars and conspiracy theorists have attempted, a chilling tableau begins to form. A gospel in which Jesus does not perish for sin, but imparts liberation from the necessity of intercession. A text wherein the crucifixion is symbolic, not salvific, where resurrection is not corporeal but intellectual. A perilous gospel. The Church, naturally, denies its very existence, yet it would be compelled to do so. The trail intensifies in an unexpected location, an inventory from the Inquisitorial Tribunal of Toulouse, 1309. Among confiscated items from a Templar cell is a scroll marked Testimonium Ignotum Unknown Testimony. It is not categorized among ritual scrolls, nor is it labeled as heretical. It is simply unknown. This scroll disappears from the record shortly thereafter. However, a note survives from an unnamed scribe, written in a hand distinct from others. Symbols familiar, speech not heard in mass. That cryptic line has been endlessly dissected, with some believing it refers to a text written in a hybrid dialect, perhaps Aramaic and Coptic, and others suggesting it was entirely coded in liturgical metaphor. Then there is the letter from Inquisitor Guillaume Imbert, the same individual whose quiet rebellion was previously chronicled. In his private folio, he references a testimony read aloud by a brother who named no apostle but claimed lineage from the breath of God. Lineage from breath, a peculiar phrase, yet not unprecedented. It echoes ancient Gnostic writings where pneuma, or breath, represents the essence of divine inheritance, not blood, not ritual, but breath. This is where the implications become profoundly uncomfortable, because buried in one of Amaric's annotations, scrawled beside a devotional chant, are the words verbum factum non est caro. The word was not made flesh, a direct reversal of the Gospel of John's foundational statement of Christian incarnation, flipped as if reflected in a mirror. If this was more than a scribal jest, more than some poetic heresy, then it may represent the smoldering ember of the redacted Gospel itself. It is not difficult to envision the panic such a document would incite, a gospel devoid of a crucifixion, a Savior who does not suffer but rather instructs, a path to the divine without martyrdom. It would obliterate centuries of doctrine with a single utterance. It would render sacrament obsolete, and it would necessitate destruction. Yet, destruction invariably leaves marks. Scroll tubes without contents, ink stains on walls, testimonies that allude to documents no longer present in the archive. One Cathar prisoner, interrogated in Albi in 1321, stated that the Templars sang the Book of the Wanderer, the one who woke but did not bleed. The Inquisitor dismissed it as poetic nonsense, but when juxtaposed with the fragments, it begins to resonate with something considerably darker. The title, Book of the Wanderer, reappears centuries later in a German esoteric volume, Der Wanderer, attributed to an unknown monk and containing only cryptic allegories. One chapter describes a man traversing a city constructed of letters, whose walls crumble when he speaks. Another chapter details a scroll with no ink that blinds those who attempt to see with their eyes, not their understanding. These tales may be mere fantasy, or they may be refracted memories of a scroll never intended to be interpreted literally. Even stranger is a 15th century Vatican marginal note, written in response to a now lost letter, which cautions, "Do not entertain the whisper of the fifth voice." It sings from the desert, not the mount. Most interpret this as metaphor, but in Templar accounts, there is frequent reference to a fifth scroll, or occasionally the scroll of no seal, a document not included with the others, perhaps because it bore no author or no signature the Church would recognize. Some now believe that this fifth scroll, this redacted gospel, was never widely circulated within the Templar ranks. It was hidden, passed from scribe to scribe, protected by the innermost circle, known only through memorized phrases and sacred gestures. If so, then its contents may never have been fully committed to writing at all, only spoken, only heard, only lived. And what of its curse? That term is not employed lightly. However, one recurring phrase in relation to the redacted gospel is extinguitur luminis. Its light extinguishes. It is found in two unrelated sources, a Dominican condemnation of heretical texts in 1315, and in a scribbled line on the inside cover of a damaged Templar prayer book discovered in southern France. The phrase appears to warn, not to promise, as if reading the gospel or understanding it carried a profound cost. The cost may have been faith, or sanity, or simply certainty. For to accept such a scroll would necessitate rejecting all else: the blood, the altar, the institution built upon substitution and sacrifice. It would imply that the divine is not something granted, but something remembered, and that is not merely theology, that is revolution. So perhaps the gospel was never truly redacted. Perhaps it was whispered once and buried within the very breath of those who dared to hear it. The tower stands, a stark silhouette of stone against the sky, austere and brooding, perched above the placid waters of the Vienne. Most visitors perceive Chinon Castle as a relic of royal drama, the historical stage where King Henry II quarreled with his sons, where Eleanor of Aquitaine once processed in silent dignity. Few direct their gaze toward the lesser tower, that structure with its narrow, slit windows and devoid of grand commemorative plaques. Fewer still comprehend what was discovered within the Chinon parchment. That document forms the primary focus for most historians. Unearthed in the Vatican's secret archives in 2001, it sent shockwaves through the academic world, revealing that Pope Clement V had secretly and unofficially absolved the Templar leadership in 1308, a political maneuver, likely a hesitant step toward mercy that ultimately never extended to the gallows. Yet, while scholarly attention converged on analyzing the Latin text, something else was quietly catalogued, then largely forgotten. A series of symbols carved into the very stone of the Chinon Tower itself, located near the base of the chamber where Jacques de Molay was held. These are not decorative carvings, nor mere graffiti. They are deliberate, precise, and they follow a distinct pattern, a spiral that curves inwards upon itself, much like a snail's shell, commencing with a seven-pointed star, and culminating in a shape scholars refer to as the Broken Sunday. Initially, these carvings were dismissed. Medieval prisoners frequently left marks initials, devotional symbols, tally marks. However, these differed significantly. They bore resemblance not to conventional Christian symbology, but to the coded alphabets employed by early alchemists. Even more curiously, the symbols match a sequence found in a Templar scroll fragment recovered from Cyprus, a sequence believed to be part of a cipher key. That scroll, preserved in the archives of the Order of Christ in Portugal, contains a string of 21 glyphs, each flanked by a mirrored cross and a half-moon. The identical sequence, in the identical order, appears carved into the tower wall at Chinon, concealed in plain sight. The implication is profound. Someone was transmitting a message, or meticulously preserving one. Cipher scholars refer to this as the Chinon loop. It is not a traditional substitution cipher, nor a simple transposition. It appears to be a hybrid, a layered system necessitating both a key text and a spatial map. One hypothesis suggests the loop functions akin to a labyrinth. One does not read it linearly from left to right, but rather traverses it, either physically or symbolically, following an inward spiral, unlocking symbols only upon crossing specific directional thresholds. The challenge lies in the absence of the key text. Or has it been found? A marginal note in one of Amaric's scrolls, yes. Him again references the loop that cannot be closed unless read from within. Most interpreted this as a metaphor. However, a 19th century Jesuit codebreaker named Elias Dumont believed it referred to a scroll called Sol Occultus, or the Hidden Sunday. According to Dumont's private notes, which remain unpublished, this scroll was mentioned in a lost inventory from the Templar commandery at La Rochelle. It was described as a map of stars and voices, not of land, and its margins, Dumont claimed, contained a sequence of glyphs matching those found at Chinon. If Sol Occultus was indeed the key, then the cipher in the tower was not merely a message, it was a lock, a vault door constructed of stone and silence, awaiting the appropriate resonance to open it. Why would the Templars embed anything into the very walls of their prison? Perhaps they believed someone would follow another knight, a brother, a witness. Or perhaps they were embedding a confession, not one extracted under torture, but one crafted in unwavering faith, a true record of their knowledge hidden beneath the surface, preserved through form rather than explicit speech. This leads to the theory of the reverse gospel, a phrase that emerged in a 17th century French manuscript detailing lost Christian sects. The anonymous author, naturally, describes a scroll found in the ruins of a place of judgment which contained symbols that spoke backward, a gospel walked, not read. The description is vague, the location is never specified. but the timeline and tone suggest Shinon, and the phrase, "a gospel walked," may not be metaphorical at all, if the cipher loop is spatial. Interestingly, a 14th century Templar prisoner, Brother Anso of Brittany, mentioned in his trial that the walls knew more than the scribes. His statement was dismissed, but centuries later, it resonates as a clue. And then, there is the matter of the hidden phrase. In 2004, a team of restorers working on the tower wall discovered faint etching beneath the spiral cipher. The words, though weathered, were confirmed by digital imaging to be Latin, quod est clausum non est mortuum, that which is closed is not dead. It is the kind of phrase amenable to a dozen interpretations. Perhaps it refers to the order, perhaps to faith, or perhaps to a scroll. For, throughout all the recovered texts, one motif recurs more frequently than any other. The concept that knowledge cannot be eradicated, only concealed. That truth, once comprehended, transforms into a presence, a spectre within the architecture. If the cipher in the tower